The drive took longer than I expected. Way longer. The GPS had given up about 40 minutes ago, leaving me with the lawyer's hand-drawn map that looked like something a 5-year-old might create. Logging roads twisted through dense forest, each unmarked turn making me question if I was completely lost. Third fork after the big rock, I muttered, squinting at the crude directions. What the hell constitutes a big rock out here? My Subaru bounced over another pothole, the suspension groaning in protest. I'd been on the road since dawn, and the afternoon sun was already starting to dip behind the mountains. Northern Idaho in October wasn't exactly warm, and I didn't want to be searching for this place in the dark. I barely remembered my grandfather, Henry Brian Martin, Mom's dad. He'd visited maybe 3 or 4 times during my childhood, always bringing weird gifts, a hand-carved whistle, a compass with strange markings, a knife that Mom immediately confiscated. He smelled like pine and tobacco, and his stories about living in the wilderness made my 8-year-old self wide-eyed with wonder. Then the visit stopped, and Mom never talked about him. Now he was dead, and somehow I was his sole heir. "You've reached your destination," I said in a mocking robot voice as I finally spotted the small clearing ahead. The trees opened up just enough to reveal a cabin nestled against the hillside. I pulled up and cut the engine, sitting for a moment to take it all in. It wasn't what I expected, not at all. According to Thomas Blackwell, the lawyer with the world's worst map drawing skills, nobody had been here since 1984. Almost 40 years of abandonment should have left the place a rotting shell. Instead, the cabin looked maintained. The log exterior was weathered but solid, the small porch swept clean, the roof intact, without a single missing shingle. "That's weird," I said to no one, grabbing my backpack and stepping out of the car. The air was crisp, carrying that distinctive mountain chill that seeps straight into your bones. Pine needles crunched under my boots as I approached the cabin. No broken windows, no animal damage, nothing to suggest decades of neglect. The key the lawyer had given me slid into the lock smoothly, as if it had been recently oiled. No resistance, no rust. The door swung open without a creak. "What the fuck?" I whispered. The inside was immaculate, not just habitable, it was clean. Really clean. The kind of clean that suggested someone had been here yesterday. A small living area with a stone fireplace opened to a basic kitchen. A doorway led to what I assumed was a bedroom. Everything was tidy, organized, and completely dust-free. I set my backpack down and ran a finger along the kitchen counter. Nothing, not even a thin film of dust. The wood-burning stove looked recently blackened. A cast-iron skillet hung from a hook, its surface gleaming with a thin coat of oil. This doesn't make any sense. I moved to the kitchen cabinets and opened one. Canned goods lined the shelves in neat rows. I pulled one out. Peaches and syrup. The label was yellowed with age, but the can itself was clean. The expiration date read 1986. The bedroom was just as strange. A neatly made bed with fresh sheets, not yellowed or musty, but actually fresh. A small dresser contained folded clothes that smelled faintly of cedar. The closet held hanging shirts and pants, a heavy coat, and a pair of boots placed precisely side by side on the floor. "Somebody's been here," I said aloud, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet cabin. They must have been. But why would anyone maintain an abandoned cabin in the middle of nowhere for decades? And why would they leave food that expired 35 years ago? I returned to the kitchen and opened drawers at random. In the third one, I found a hunting knife in a leather sheath. The handle was worn smooth from years of use, but when I pulled the blade out, it gleamed in the fading daylight. recently sharpened. The edge looked like it could slice through paper without resistance. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. I spent the next hour checking the cabin more thoroughly. The bathroom had towels hanging on a rack. The small linen closet contained extra blankets, all neatly folded. Even the fireplace was clean, with a stack of split wood beside it, ready to burn. As darkness fell, I lit the kerosene lamp I found on the kitchen table. The flame cast long shadows across the walls. I'd brought my own supplies, not expecting to find anything usable, but now I wasn't sure if I should touch the food that was here. Something about it felt wrong. I turned on the small battery-powered radio I'd brought, hoping to catch a weather report. Instead of music or voices, a harsh static filled the room. I checked the batteries. They were new. I tried adjusting the tuning dial, but the static only changed in pitch, never clearing into an actual station. "Great," I muttered, switching it off. That's when I noticed the old radio sitting on a shelf. It was the kind with vacuum tubes, probably from the 1950s. Out of curiosity, I flipped its switch. Static, identical to what I just heard from my modern radio, burst from the speaker. I quickly turned it off and checked the back. No batteries, no power cord, nothing that could possibly make it work. Just old wiring, I told myself. Residual charge or something. But I didn't really believe it. I needed to wash up before bed. The small bathroom had a sink with a hand pump for water. Surprisingly, it worked after a few tries, bringing up cold, clear water. I splashed some on my face and looked up at the mirror hanging above the sink. For a split second, just the briefest moment, the face looking back at me wasn't mine. It was older, weathered, with deep-set eyes and a beard I didn't have. Then it was gone, and I was staring at my own startled expression. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding. "Just tired," I said, my voice shaky. "Just really fucking tired from the drive." I decided it was time for bed. The bedroom felt colder than the rest of the cabin, despite its small size. I changed quickly and slid under the covers, not bothering to undress completely. Something about the place made me want to stay ready to move. As I lay there, I became aware of the sounds of the cabin, the wind outside, the occasional settling of logs, and something else. Certain floorboards that creaked rhythmically as if someone were walking across them. I sat up, listening intently. The creaking stopped. I got out of bed and walked to the spot where I'd heard the noise. The floor was solid under my feet, not making a sound when I stepped directly on the boards that had been creaking moments before. I tried jumping slightly. Nothing, not even a groan from the wood. "Old cabins make noise," I said firmly. "It's normal." But when I returned to bed and turned off the lamp, the creaking started again. Same pattern, same boards, like footsteps moving from the kitchen to the living area and back. I pulled the blanket tighter around me and closed my eyes, determined to sleep. Tomorrow, I'd explore the property in daylight. Figure out how the cabin could be in this condition after decades of abandonment. Maybe find signs of whoever had been maintaining it. Then I'd call the lawyer and figure out what to do with this place. Probably sell it. I wasn't the cabin in the woods type, and something about this place felt off. As I drifted towards sleep, one last thought crossed my mind. The face in the mirror had looked familiar. It looked like the faded photograph of my grandfather that Mom kept hidden in her dresser drawer, the one she thought I didn't know about. I woke up to sunlight streaming through the cabin windows. For a second, I forgot where I was. Then it all came rushing back. The inheritance, the cabin, the creaking floorboards in the night. I rubbed my eyes and swung my legs over the side of the bed. That's when I saw them. Muddy boot prints on the floor. They led from the front door straight to the kitchen. "What the fuck?" I muttered. I checked my boots by the door. They were clean, exactly where I'd left them. I hadn't gone outside since I arrived yesterday. I walked the entire path of the prints, checking each window and door, all locked from the inside. Someone had been in here while I slept. My heart hammered against my ribs as I grabbed a dish towel from the kitchen and filled a bucket with water from the hand pump. The prints were already starting to dry, so I took a few photos with my phone before mopping them up. The mud came away easily, but my unease didn't. After cleaning up, I decided to check out the property like I'd planned. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe I'd find whoever was maintaining this place. I stepped outside, the morning air crisp against my face. The cabin looked even more isolated in daylight, surrounded by dense forest on all sides. I circled the structure, looking for any signs of recent visitors. When I reached the back of the cabin, something caught my eye. The firewood stacked against the rear wall looked off, not quite flush with the wall. I pulled a few logs away and noticed a section of the wall that didn't match the rest. The wood was newer, less weathered. I removed more firewood until I uncovered what looked like a panel. It wasn't part of the original construction, more like something added later. When I pressed against it, it gave slightly, loose. I dug my fingers into the edge and pulled. The panel came away easily, revealing a narrow doorway built into the cabin wall. It had been hidden completely by the stacked firewood. "Jesus," I whispered. A small door with a simple latch stared back at me. My grandfather's secret room? I hesitated, then unlatched it and pulled it open. Stale air rushed out. I fumbled for my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam revealed a concrete room, maybe 8 by 10 feet. No windows, just bare walls, a concrete floor, and my stomach lurched. Metal restraints bolted to one wall, the kind you'd use to chain someone up. In the corner sat a stained cot with a thin mattress. Dark brownish stains covered parts of it. I didn't need to be a forensics expert to guess what they were. "What the hell did you do, Grandpa?" I whispered. A metal shelf stood against the far wall, lined with glass jars. I moved closer, my flashlight illuminating their contents. The first jar contained what looked like human teeth, dozens of them. The next held military dog tags, at least 15 or 20, clinking softly as my hand shook. The last jar contained newspaper clippings, yellowed with age. I carefully removed a few and unfolded them on the shelf. Local hiker missing in National Forest. Search called off for missing veteran. Third disappearance. This year baffles authorities. The dates ranged from 1952 to 1984, the year my grandfather stopped visiting us, the year before I was born. My hands trembled as I replaced the clippings. This wasn't just a hidden room, it was evidence. My grandfather hadn't been some eccentric hermit. He'd been something much worse. I backed out of the room, slamming the door shut. I needed to get the hell out of here, call the police, tell them what I'd found. I ran to my truck, fumbling with the keys. The engine sputtered when I turned the key, then died. I tried again. Nothing. Not even a click. "Come on." I slammed my palm against the steering wheel. I grabbed my phone to call for help. Dead. Completely dead, though I'd charged it fully last night and barely used it. "This isn't happening," I muttered. I had to get out of here on foot. The lawyer's directions had mentioned a main road about 5 miles back. I could hike out, flag down a car, get help. I grabbed my backpack, stuffed it with water bottles and energy bars from my supplies, and started down the dirt path that had brought me here. The forest seemed darker than it should be at mid-morning, the trees pressing in close on either side of the narrow trail. I walked for what felt like 2 hours, following the path that should have led back to the main road. But something was wrong. The trees looked familiar, too familiar. When I emerged into a clearing, my blood ran cold. The cabin stood in front of me. Somehow, I'd circled back. "No fucking way," I said. I checked my watch. I'd been walking for over 2 hours in a straight line. This wasn't possible. I tried again, this time cutting through the forest instead of following the path. I used my pocket knife to mark trees as I went, slashing X's into the bark every 20 yards or so. The forest grew thicker, the underbrush catching at my jeans. I pushed forward, determined to find the road. After another hour of hiking, I saw light ahead, a clearing. Relief washed over me until I stepped out and saw the cabin again. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." I ran to one of the nearby trees and found an X carved into the bark, my mark from earlier. Somehow, I'd walked in a perfect circle despite maintaining a straight course. I tried once more, in a different direction. Same result. No matter which way I went, I ended up back at the clearing with the cabin. The sun was sinking now. The sun was sinking now, painting the sky in deep oranges and reds. I stood at the edge of the clearing, staring at the cabin with a growing sense of dread. My third attempt to leave had failed just like the others. I checked my phone again. Still dead. My truck keys felt useless in my pocket. "This isn't possible," I said out loud, as if hearing my own voice might ground me in reality. I walked to a fallen log and sat down, trying to think logically. There had to be an explanation. Maybe I was disoriented. Maybe there was something about the terrain that kept leading me back here. But the marked trees, that didn't make sense. The forest grew darker around me as the sun dipped below the tree line. The temperature dropped quickly, and I shivered. Despite everything inside me screaming not to, I knew I had to go back into the cabin for the night. I couldn't survive in these woods after dark, not without proper gear. I approached the cabin slowly, like it might suddenly lunge at me. The porch steps creaked under my weight. At the door, I hesitated, then turned the knob. Inside, everything looked exactly as I'd left it. The mopped floor had dried. The kerosene lamp sat on the table where I'd placed it. Nothing seemed disturbed. I locked the door behind me and dragged a chair over, wedging it under the knob. I did the same with the back door. Then I checked all the windows, making sure they were locked too. My eyes kept drifting to the wall where I knew the hidden room lay, concealed behind its panel and stack of firewood. What else might be hidden in this place? What other secrets had my grandfather left behind? I grabbed the kerosene lamp and lit it, then methodically searched every inch of the cabin. I checked under the bed, inside every cabinet, behind every piece of furniture. I tapped walls, looking for hollow spots. I examined the floorboards for loose planks. Nothing. Night had fully fallen outside. The darkness beyond the windows was absolute. No street lights, no distant houses, just pitch-black forest. I was trapped. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Something about this place, something I couldn't explain, was keeping me here. The same thing that had kept the cabin pristine for decades. The same thing that had left those muddy boot prints on the floor. I sat at the kitchen table, the lamp casting long shadows across the room. My grandfather's hidden room with its restraints and jars of teeth flashed in my mind. The newspaper clippings, the missing hikers. Had they been trapped here too? Had they tried to leave, only to find themselves walking in circles, always returning to this clearing? I thought about the face I'd seen in the mirror yesterday. My grandfather's face. I thought about the footsteps I'd heard in the night, the perfectly maintained cabin that should have been rotting after 40 years of abandonment. "What is this place?" I whispered. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the trees. Inside, the lamp flame flickered, though there was no draft. I was trapped in my dead grandfather's cabin, and night was falling. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the kerosene lamp. The flame danced inside the glass, throwing weird shadows across the walls. My watch said 11:37 p.m. I wasn't going to sleep anytime soon. The wind outside had picked up, making the cabin creak and groan like it was alive. I kept thinking about those muddy boot prints from this morning. Someone had been in here while I slept. Someone who could get past locked doors and windows. Or something. A loud thump from above made me jump. I froze, holding my breath. Another thump, then a scraping sound, like something being dragged across the ceiling. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps walking across the attic crawl space. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding pathetic even to my own ears. The footsteps stopped, then started again, moving toward the front of the cabin. Fuck this. I grabbed the kerosene lamp and my pocket knife. If someone was up there, I needed to know. The alternative, sitting here listening to them walk around above my head all night, wasn't an option. I remembered seeing the attic access in the hallway ceiling. It was one of those pull-down ladder deals. I set the lamp on a small table in the hall and reached up, finding the small rope handle. I tugged, and the ladder unfolded with a creak that seemed way too loud in the quiet cabin. The square of darkness above me looked like a mouth. I held the lamp up, but its light barely penetrated the blackness. "Is someone up there?" I called again. Nothing. I put the knife in my pocket and grabbed the lamp. The ladder creaked under my weight as I climbed, holding the light ahead of me. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The smell hit me first. Cigarette smoke, fresh, not stale. Someone had been smoking up here recently, like minutes ago recently. I pulled myself into the crawl space, hunched over to avoid hitting my head on the rafters. The lamp cast just enough light to see a few feet ahead. Dust covered the floor except for several clear paths where it had been disturbed. The smoke hung in the air, a thin haze that caught the lamplight. I followed it, moving carefully between exposed beams and roof supports. "I know someone's up here," I said, trying to sound confident instead of terrified. Something glinted in the lamplight. I moved closer and saw a metal lighter sitting on one of the beams. I picked it up. It was still warm. 2 initials were engraved on the side: H.B. Henry Brian Martin. My grandfather. I nearly dropped the lighter. It was impossible. He'd been dead for months, but the lighter was warm, like it had just been used. I pocketed it and looked around, searching for whoever had left it. The crawl space extended the length of the cabin, but I was alone. Completely alone. I made my way back to the access hatch and climbed down, pulling the ladder up after me. Back in the hallway, I examined the lighter more closely. It was an old Zippo, worn smooth from years of use. The initials were hand-carved, not factory engraved. I tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe someone else had been living in the cabin, someone who found my grandfather's lighter and was using it. But that didn't explain how they got in and out with all the doors and windows locked from the inside. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen with the lamp burning, the lighter on the table in front of me, waiting for morning. The next few days were a slow descent into madness. It started with small things. I'd put my coffee mug on the kitchen table, turn around to get something from the cabinet, and find the mug sitting on the counter when I turned back. At first, I thought I was just tired, misremembering where I'd put things. Then it got worse. Books moved from shelves to tables. My backpack kept appearing in different rooms. I'd leave my jacket on the back of a chair and find it hanging by the door minutes later. And the knife, my grandfather's hunting knife, that was the worst. I'd hidden it in the bottom drawer of the dresser after finding it that first night, but it wouldn't stay there. I found it on the kitchen table one morning, then on the windowsill that afternoon. The next day, it was under my pillow. I started taking pictures with my phone whenever I put something down, just to prove to myself I wasn't losing my mind. The battery would drain within minutes, but I managed to capture a few shots that confirmed what I already knew. Things were moving when I wasn't looking. On the third day, I noticed something wrong with the bathroom mirror. I was washing my face when I realized the reflection didn't match the bathroom I was standing in. The towel rack behind me should have been visible, but instead, I saw the edge of the kitchen table. I spun around. The bathroom was normal, but in the mirror, I was looking at the kitchen. I backed away, heart racing. When I returned an hour later, the mirror showed the living room. Later that night, it reflected the bedroom, though I was still standing in the bathroom. By the fourth night, I was barely sleeping. I'd doze off for 20 minutes, then jerk awake. Certain someone was in the room with me. The footsteps in the attic had become a nightly occurrence. Sometimes they'd stop directly above wherever I happened to be, like whoever or whatever was up there was tracking my movements. I was sitting on the edge of the bed that night, too wired to sleep, when I heard the footsteps start again. I'd gotten almost used to them by now. Almost. I went to the bathroom to splash water on my face. The mirror didn't show the bathroom anymore. It showed the hidden room behind the woodpile, but it wasn't empty. A man sat on the cot, sharpening a knife with slow, methodical strokes. He was younger than I expected, maybe in his 30s, with a full beard and intense eyes that seemed focused entirely on the blade in his hands. I recognized him from old photos my mother had kept hidden. It was my grandfather, Henry, not as the old man I barely remembered, but as he'd been decades ago. He looked up suddenly, directly at me, as if he could see me watching him through the mirror. His lips curved into a smile that never reached his eyes. I stumbled backward out of the bathroom. When I worked up the courage to look again, the mirror showed only my own pale, terrified face. The next morning, I decided to try escaping again. I couldn't stay in this cabin another night. Whatever was happening, it was getting worse, not better. This time, I'd avoid any paths completely. No dirt roads, no hiking trails, nothing that could loop back on itself. Just straight through the forest in one direction until I hit civilization or died trying. I filled my backpack with water bottles and energy bars, stuffed my pockets with anything useful I could find, and headed out at dawn. I picked a direction, east according to the position of the rising sun, and started walking. I marked trees as I went, not with X's this time, but with arrows pointing back the way I'd come. If the forest was somehow turning me around, I'd know it. Hours passed. My legs ached, and scratches from branches and thorns covered my arms, but I kept going. The forest grew denser, the trees older and larger. I hadn't seen any signs of human presence. No beer cans, no old campfires, nothing, until I stumbled into a small clearing. At first, I thought it was just a pile of fallen logs. Then I realized it was the collapsed remains of a small hunting shack. The roof had caved in years ago, and most of the walls had rotted away. I approached cautiously. Something white gleamed among the rotted wood. I moved closer and felt my stomach turn. Bones, human bones, scattered among the debris. A skull, partially buried in leaves. Ribs, a femur. I backed away, then froze as something flashed in the trees to my right. A small red light blinked once, then went dark. I moved toward it and found a trail camera strapped to a tree trunk. These were motion-activated cameras hunters used to track game. But this one looked ancient. The plastic casing yellowed and cracked. When I opened it, there were no batteries inside. Nothing that could have powered that flash I'd just seen. I closed it quickly and kept walking, faster now. The sun was getting low, and I needed to find my way out of these woods before dark. But as the shadows lengthened, a sickening familiarity crept over me. The trees were thinning out. I could see a clearing ahead. No, it couldn't be. I broke into a run, bursting through the tree line just as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains. The cabin sat in front of me, windows glowing with the warm light of the kerosene lamp I'd left burning on the kitchen table. I'd walked for hours in a straight line. I'd marked my path. I'd found a collapsed shack that had to be miles from where I started. And somehow I was back where I began. I headed back to the cabin as the sun started to set. The whole walk back, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from between the trees. Every time I turned to look, there was nothing there, but the sensation lingered like an itch I couldn't scratch. The cabin looked exactly the same from the outside. Weathered wood siding, solid roof, smoke curling from the chimney. Wait, smoke? I froze in my tracks. I hadn't lit a fire before I left. My heart hammered in my chest as I approached the front door. The knob turned easily in my hand, unlocked just as I'd left it in my hurry to escape. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The air hit me like walking into a freezer. My breath clouded in front of my face, and I instinctively wrapped my arms around myself. "What the hell?" I muttered. It had to be at least 75 degrees outside, a warm day for October in Idaho. But inside the cabin, it felt like the dead of winter, the kind of bone-deep cold that makes your joints ache. I checked the fireplace, but it was cold and empty. No source for the smoke I'd seen. I walked to the thermostat on the wall, an ancient dial model that probably hadn't worked in decades. It read 32 degrees, freezing point. I tapped it, thinking it was stuck, but the needle didn't budge. The bathroom door was ajar, and I caught a glimpse of the mirror inside. Something pulled me toward it, a compulsion I couldn't fight. I pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. My reflection wasn't there. Instead, I saw an older man with a full white beard and piercing blue eyes. My grandfather, Henry Bryan Martin. He wasn't just a vague impression like before. He was fully there, staring directly at me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I stumbled backward, nearly falling over the edge of the bathtub. When I looked again, my own terrified face stared back at me. "You're losing it," I whispered to myself. "Just sleep deprivation." But I knew it wasn't. The cabin was changing, or maybe it was changing me. A soft sound caught my attention, whispers coming from somewhere inside the walls. I pressed my ear against the wooden paneling in the hallway. "Needs to learn." Oh, just like before. "Keep them here." The voices were too muffled to make out completely, but they were definitely there, multiple voices speaking over each other. I moved along the wall, trying to follow the sound, but it seemed to shift, always staying just out of reach. I ended up in the hallway beneath the attic access. The whispers grew louder there, more insistent. I was about to reach for the pull-down ladder when it happened. The trapdoor slammed open with a crack that echoed through the cabin. The ladder unfolded itself and crashed down, missing my head by inches. I jumped back, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Fuck this," I said, backing away. "Fuck this place." But I couldn't leave. Not yet. I needed to check something first. I went outside to the woodpile and moved the logs away from the hidden panel. My hand shook as I pulled it open and ducked inside the concrete room. The air was even colder here, my breath coming out in thick white clouds. The jars on the metal shelf caught my eye immediately. They were empty, all of them. The teeth, the dog tags, the newspaper clippings, gone. I picked up the jar that had held the clippings and turned it over. Nothing fell out. I moved to the shelf where I'd seen the articles about missing hikers and veterans. The papers were still there, but when I picked them up, the text had vanished. Just blank, yellowed paper in my hands. The cot against the wall looked different too. The stains were gone, the fabric cleaner than before. I reached out and touched it. It was warm, like someone had just been lying on it. I yanked my hand back and stumbled out of the room, slamming the panel shut behind me and piling the logs back haphazardly. My mind raced as I went back inside the cabin. I couldn't stay here, but I couldn't just leave either. What if someone else found this place? What if some hiker or camper stumbled across it and got trapped like I was? The thought of someone else going through this, or worse, falling victim to whatever my grandfather had been doing here, made me sick. I needed answers. I needed to understand what was happening so I could figure out how to end it. I started searching the cabin methodically, looking for anything I might have missed. I checked under the furniture, inside cabinets, behind drawers. In the bedroom, I noticed a floorboard that didn't quite match the others, slightly newer looking with different grain patterns. I worked my fingernails into the edge and pried it up. The wood came away easily, revealing a small space underneath. Inside was a stack of leather-bound journals, their covers worn and cracked with age. I pulled them out and took them to the kitchen table. The kerosene lamp flickered as I opened the first one, dated 1952. The handwriting was neat and precise, nothing like the scrawl I'd expect from a madman. The first entry read, "Found the place today. It's perfect. Remote enough that no one will stumble across it, but close enough to the trails to catch stragglers. The man who sold it to me didn't mention anything unusual, but I felt it the moment I stepped inside. This place is special. It exists somewhere between." I flipped through more pages, my stomach turning as I read. My grandfather documented everything: how he found the cabin, how he discovered its special properties, and how he used them. The cabin existed in what he called a thin place, somewhere reality didn't work quite right. He'd discovered by accident that people who entered couldn't leave unless he allowed it. The property created a loop, always bringing them back no matter which direction they walked. And he'd used it. God, he'd used it. Page after page detailed the visitors he'd had over the years. Hikers, veterans, drifters, people no one would miss. He'd let them wander into his trap, then kept them in that concrete room until he was done with them. The worst part was how clinical his notes were. No emotion, just observations and methods, like he was conducting experiments rather than committing murders. The last journal, dated 1984, was different. The handwriting had changed, becoming more erratic. The entries talked about the cabin wanting things, about it having a will of its own. He wrote about hearing voices in the walls and seeing things in mirrors. The final entry sent ice through my veins. The cabin needs a keeper. It's always needed one. Before me, there were others. After me, there will be more. Blood calls to blood. When I'm gone, it will find another Martin to continue the work. The cycle cannot be broken. I slammed the journal shut and pushed away from the table. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the edge. The cabin was trying to make me its new keeper. That's why I couldn't leave. That's why I kept seeing my grandfather in the mirror. The place was working to turn me into him, to continue whatever sick legacy he'd started. I looked around the kitchen, suddenly seeing it differently. Not just a cabin, but a trap, a prison, a slaughterhouse, and it wanted me to be its new butcher. I woke up staring at my own face in the bathroom mirror, except it wasn't exactly my face. The eyes were wrong, bluer. The beard was fuller, whiter at the edges. When I blinked, it was gone. Just me again, stubble darkening my jaw, eyes bloodshot from another night without real sleep. "Fuck," I whispered, splashing cold water on my face. My hands were shaking. This was the third time this week. The changes were getting more noticeable, staying longer each time. Yesterday, I'd caught my reflection smiling when I definitely wasn't. I dried my face with a towel and walked back to the kitchen where the journals were spread across the table. 5 days trapped in this place, and I was losing myself piece by piece. My phone sat dead on the table. The truck wouldn't start. The forest just looped me back here no matter which direction I walked. And now the cabin was changing me. I picked up one of the journals, flipping through Henry's meticulous notes from 1973. The handwriting was neat, controlled, nothing like the frantic scrawls from his final entries in '84. "You're fighting it," a voice said from somewhere behind me. I spun around. "Empty cabin. Makes it harder," the voice continued. My grandfather's voice, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "Just let it happen, boy. Blood calls to blood." "Fuck you," I said to the empty room. I looked down and jumped back, heart hammering. The hunting knife was in my hand. I hadn't picked it up. I hadn't even seen it on the table. But there it was, my fingers wrapped around the handle like they belonged there. I threw it across the room. It clattered against the wall and slid under the couch. "Jesus Christ," I muttered, wiping my palm on my jeans. My hand felt dirty, like I dipped it in something sticky. I went back to the journals, determined to find something, anything that might help me escape. There had to be a way out. Henry hadn't been trapped here. He'd chosen to stay. He'd used this place. Hours passed as I read through entry after entry. The cabin creaked and settled around me, almost like it was breathing. Outside, the sun tracked across the sky, shadows lengthening across the floor. When I looked up again, I wasn't in the kitchen. I was standing in the hidden room behind the woodpile, staring at the metal restraints bolted to the wall. The empty jars gleamed on the shelf. The cot looked freshly made. Perfect for keeping them still, Henry's voice said, using my mouth. The restraints need oiling, though. Can't have them squeaking and alerting others nearby. I felt my hand reach out to touch the cold metal cuffs. "No," I shouted, jerking back. My voice echoed in the concrete room. "I'm not doing this." I had no memory of walking here, no memory of opening the hidden door or climbing through. The last thing I remembered was sitting at the kitchen table with the journals. I backed out of the room, slamming the panel shut and stacking the firewood against it with shaking hands. When I turned around, the knife was on the ground at my feet. "You'll need it," Henry's voice whispered, "for preparation." I left the knife where it was and ran back to the cabin. Inside, I locked the door and wedged a chair under the handle as if that would keep something out or keep me in. Back at the kitchen table, I grabbed the earliest journal from 1952. I'd skimmed it before, but now I read every word carefully. Henry had found this place by accident, gotten lost in the woods just like I had. But unlike me, he'd discovered what the cabin could do and decided to use it. There, on page 17, I found it. A description of the first time he'd felt the cabin's power trying to take hold of him. "It wants a keeper," he'd written. "Tried to turn me away at first, then tried to make me leave. When that didn't work, it offered me power instead, a bargain sealed in blood." I flipped forward through the journals, scanning for more mentions of blood. There it was again in 1956. "The ritual must be renewed. My blood feeds this place, keeps it bound to my will." And again in 1963. "The binding grows weaker, must strengthen it at the solstice." I kept reading, piecing it together. Henry hadn't just found this cabin. He'd bound it to himself through some kind of ritual. He'd used his own blood to control whatever power lived here, to harness it for his sick games. "You're getting warmer," Henry's voice said, sounding amused. I ignored it, focusing on the final journal from 1984. The handwriting was erratic, the entries disjointed. Henry had been losing control. The cabin had been fighting back, trying to consume him instead of being controlled by him. The last coherent entry described a ritual, a circle drawn in the hidden room, words spoken in Latin, blood spilled onto specific points of the concrete floor. "Blood calls to blood," I read aloud. "When I am gone, it will find another Martin to continue the work." That's what was happening to me. The cabin wasn't just keeping me here, it was trying to turn me into Henry, to make me its new keeper. And it was working. I was losing time, finding myself in places I didn't remember going, holding things I didn't remember picking up. I needed to break the binding. If Henry had used blood to control this place, maybe blood could set it free, or at least break its hold on me. I spent the rest of the day studying the journals, looking for every mention of the ritual. By sunset, I had a plan, a desperate, probably stupid plan, but it was all I had. I needed to reverse the ritual. Henry had used it to bind the cabin's power to his will. If I performed it backward, maybe I could undo that binding. "It won't work," Henry's voice said as I gathered supplies. "The cabin needs a keeper. It chose me. Now it's choosing you." I caught my reflection in the window glass, white beard, blue eyes, Henry's face wearing my expression of determination. "I'm not you," I said to the reflection, "and I'm not staying here." I waited until midnight when the cabin's energy seemed strongest. The floorboards creaked rhythmically even though I was sitting still. The temperature dropped until I could see my breath. The kerosene lamp flickered despite the absence of any draft. I took a deep breath and walked outside to the woodpile. The night was moonless, the darkness absolute except for the small circle of light from my lamp. I moved the logs away from the hidden panel, my hands steady now that I had a purpose. The panel swung open easily as if the cabin wanted me to enter. Inside, the concrete room was freezing cold, the metal restraints gleaming dully in the lamplight. I set the lamp on the floor and took out the supplies I'd gathered. Henry's knife, the final journal open to the ritual page, and a piece of chalk I'd found in a kitchen drawer. Following the journal's diagram, I drew a circle on the concrete floor, then added the symbols Henry had sketched around its edge, but instead of standing in the center as he had done, I positioned myself outside the circle. "This is pointless," Henry's voice said, closer now, almost like he was standing right behind me. "You can't fight what you are." I ignored him and opened the journal to the ritual page. The Latin words were unfamiliar on my tongue, but I read them carefully, backward, reversing the order Henry had used. Nothing happened. "You need blood," Henry's voice reminded me, almost gently. "Blood calls to blood." I picked up the knife, his knife, and looked at my palm. This was insane. I was about to cut myself open in a hidden room in a cabin that might not even exist in normal reality, performing a ritual I'd pieced together from the ramblings of a murderer. But what choice did I have? I pressed the blade to my palm and cut a clean line across it. The pain was sharp, immediate. Blood welled up, dark in the lamplight. I held my hand over the circle and let the blood drip onto the concrete floor, continuing to recite the Latin phrases backward. As the first drops hit the floor, the temperature in the room plummeted. My breath came out in thick white clouds. "Stop," Henry's voice commanded, no longer amused. "You don't know what you're doing." I kept going, reading the words backward, letting my blood fall onto the symbols I'd drawn. The knife felt hot in my hand, almost burning. "Stop!" Henry's voice roared, and the lamp flickered violently. The concrete beneath my feet began to vibrate. The jars on the metal shelf rattled. I raised my voice, shouting the Latin phrases now, determined to finish. As I spoke the final words, I slashed the knife across my palm again, deeper this time, letting more blood flow onto the circle. The cabin began to shake. The blood hit the circle and everything went to hell. The walls cracked like someone had taken a sledgehammer to them, jagged lines racing across the concrete from floor to ceiling. The metal shelf tore free from its moorings and crashed to the ground. Empty jars exploding into deadly shards that flew across the room like shrapnel. I ducked, covering my face with my arm as glass peppered my back. "Stop this!" Henry's voice wasn't in my head anymore. It was everywhere, booming and distorted like it was coming through blown speakers. The bathroom mirror on the wall shattered with a sound like a gunshot. Each broken piece caught the light from my lamp, and in every single fragment, I could see Henry's face, not mine, his mouth twisted in rage, eyes wild with fury. He was screaming, but the words were lost in the chaos of the room tearing itself apart. Behind me, the door to the hidden room slammed shut with a bang that shook dust from the ceiling. I spun around, lunging for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. "You think you can undo what I've done?" Henry's voice rattled the walls. "Blood calls to blood, boy. You can't escape what you are." I turned back to the ritual circle. determined to finish what I'd started. The concrete floor beneath the chalk lines was fracturing, cracks spreading outward from where my blood had fallen. Dark, rich soil pushed up through the breaks, bubbling like it was boiling. "Fuck you," I muttered, continuing the Latin phrases from the journal. My voice grew stronger with each word. A metallic scraping sound made me look up. The restraints bolted to the wall were moving on their own, chains rattling as they pulled free from their anchors. They slithered across the floor like metal snakes, reaching for my ankles. I kicked one away and slashed at another with Henry's knife, still clutching the journal in my other hand. The chain wrapped around the blade, trying to wrench it from my grip. I yanked it back, nearly losing my balance as I continued the ritual. "Inverto vinculum sanguinis," I shouted over the cacophony of breaking concrete and Henry's howls of rage. The soil bubbling up through the cracks in the floor turned darker, almost black. Something pale pushed through the dirt. Bony fingers, then hands, emerging from the earth like something from a nightmare. Skeletal hands, dozens of them, clawing their way up. One grabbed my ankle, its grip surprisingly strong for something made of bone. I looked down and saw a glint of metal caught between the finger bones. A dog tag. These were Henry's victims, the missing hikers and veterans, their remains buried beneath this room all these years. "They're mine." Henry's voice shook the walls. "Mine." Another hand shot up and grabbed my other ankle. I slashed at it with the knife, but more took its place, clutching, pulling, trying to drag me down into the earth with them. "I'm trying to free you," I gasped, struggling to stay upright. "I'm trying to end this." I forced myself to focus on the ritual, reading the final words from the journal. The hands pulled harder, and I fell to one knee. The journal slipped from my grasp, sliding across the floor. "Fuck!" I lunged for it, but the skeletal hands held me fast. I couldn't reach the journal, but I remembered the last words. I had to finish this. With the knife still in my hand, I sliced deeper across my arm, above the first cut on my palm. Blood welled up immediately, running down my arm in rivulets. "Salvo vos!" I shouted, the final words of the reversed ritual. "Salvo vos!" I slammed my bleeding arm down onto the circle, smearing blood across the chalk lines. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then everything happened at once. A blinding white light erupted from the circle, so bright it burned my eyes. The room seemed to inhale, everything pulling inward for a split second before exploding outward with devastating force. The blast threw me against the wall like I was nothing, my head cracking against the concrete. The last thing I saw before darkness took me was the skeletal hands dissolving into dust, floating upward like ashes from a fire. I don't know how long I was out. Could have been minutes, could have been hours. When I finally came to, sunlight was streaming into the room through fresh cracks in the walls. My head throbbed, and my arm stung where I'd cut it. I touched the back of my head, and my fingers came away sticky with blood. I blinked, trying to clear my vision. The room was destroyed. The concrete floor had split open in several places, revealing dark soil underneath, but it was just dirt now, still and lifeless. The metal restraints lay in twisted heaps, no longer animated. The skeletal hands were gone, and the door that had slammed shut, trapping me inside, now stood open, sunlight spilling through the doorway. I pushed myself up, wincing at the pain that shot through my body. Every muscle ached like I'd been hit by a truck. Glass crunched under my feet as I staggered toward the door, half expecting it to slam shut again. But it didn't. The door remained open, offering escape from what had been my prison just moments before. I stepped through, squinting in the bright morning light. The woodpile was scattered across the ground, logs thrown in every direction by the force of whatever had happened in that room. I looked back at the cabin. From the outside, it looked almost normal, except for the new cracks running up the walls and the broken windows. But I could feel the difference. The oppressive weight that had hung over this place was gone. The air felt lighter, cleaner somehow. Henry's voice was silent. For the first time since I'd arrived, the only thoughts in my head were my own. I wasn't sure if I'd destroyed the cabin's power completely or just broken its hold on me. But I knew one thing for certain. I was free to leave. And that's exactly what I intended to do. I found a storage shed behind the cabin that I hadn't noticed before. Maybe it had been there all along, or maybe it had appeared after the ritual. I wasn't sure anymore what was real and what wasn't about this place. The small wooden structure was weathered gray, blending into the tree line so well it was easy to miss. Inside, dust motes danced in the beams of sunlight that cut through gaps in the walls. Unlike the cabin, this place hadn't been maintained. Spiderwebs stretched across corners, and mouse droppings scattered the dirt floor. But there, against the back wall, was exactly what I needed. A pile of lumber scraps, a coffee can full of rusty nails, and a hammer with a worn wooden handle. I gathered what I could carry and headed back to the cabin. My body still ached from being thrown against the wall during the ritual. The cut on my arm had stopped bleeding, but throbbed with each heartbeat. The head wound wasn't as bad as it felt. Head wounds always bleed like crazy. But I had a killer headache. I approached the woodpile first, now scattered across the ground from the explosion. One by one, I stacked the logs back against the wall, rebuilding the pile that had hidden the false panel for who knows how many years. Behind it, the panel hung loose, and beyond that, the door to the hidden room stood open like a mouth waiting to swallow more victims. Standing in the doorway, I looked at the destruction inside. Concrete floor cracked open, metal restraints twisted like dead snakes. The soil where skeletal hands had emerged now looked ordinary, just dirt. No bones, no dog tags, nothing to prove what had happened. But I knew, and I wasn't taking any chances. I hammered boards across the doorway, one after another, the sound of each nail driving home echoing through the trees. Birds scattered at the noise. My muscles protested with each swing of the hammer, but I kept going until I'd used every board and nail I'd found. When I finished, I replaced the false panel, making sure it fit snugly against the wall. Then I stacked the firewood back in place, higher and tighter than before. To anyone who didn't know what to look for, it would just be a woodpile against the cabin wall. Back inside, I found a pen and paper in a kitchen drawer. I wrote a simple note. Do not open. Do not sell. I placed it in the center of the kitchen table where it couldn't be missed. Maybe it wouldn't make any difference. Maybe whoever came next wouldn't read it or wouldn't care. But I had to try. I packed my few belongings and walked outside to my truck. The path that had seemed impossible to follow now looked clear. The trees no longer seemed to shift and move when I wasn't looking directly at them. The forest felt like a forest again, not a living trap designed to bring me back to the cabin. I turned the key in the ignition, half expecting the same dead click I'd heard every time I'd tried before. The engine roared to life immediately. I almost laughed with relief. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out to see the battery at full charge and notifications for missed calls from Thomas Blackwell, the lawyer, 3 days worth. I'd call him back when I was far away from this place. As I drove down the dirt road, I watched the cabin shrink in my rearview mirror. I knew I hadn't destroyed it completely. The ritual had broken its hold on me, freed me, and maybe the spirits of Henry's victims, but the cabin itself still stood. The thin place, as Henry had called it in his journals, still existed. I kept driving until I hit pavement, then kept going until I crossed the state line. Only then did I pull over at a gas station to fill up and breathe. I made a decision then. I wouldn't sell the property. I'd keep it, pay the taxes yearly, maintain ownership from a distance. I told no one about what I'd found there. Not the hidden room, not the jars of teeth and dog tags, not the newspaper clippings of missing hikers and veterans. I deleted the photos I'd taken from my phone and never printed them. Months passed, then years. I moved on with my life, but I never forgot. Sometimes catching my reflection unexpectedly in a store window, a rearview mirror, the black screen of my phone before it lights up, I'd see Henry's face instead of mine. Just for a second. Blue eyes instead of hazel. White beard instead of clean shaven. Then it would be gone, and I'd be looking at myself again. I knew what would happen someday. After I die, someone else will inherit the cabin. A distant relative, maybe, or the state if I have no heirs. Someone else will drive up that dirt road, use a key from a lawyer, and find the cabin impossibly clean with a stocked pantry and a made bed. Someone else will notice the woodpile doesn't sit flush against the wall. Someone else will find the loose panel and the door behind it. Boarded up, but not impossible to open. But that would be their problem to solve, their choice to make, their battle to fight. I did what I could. I left a warning. The rest is up to them.